Arcus 3. Spent the entire day doing unnecessary mundane tasks, like sweeping the floor, dusting statues and furniture, and polishing silverware, all in a fairly successful attempt to keep my mind busy. I imagine once I have the Orus working as it should be, I'll be able to keep myself distracted with what seems to be dreaming black fog. Toward the evening, I tinkered with the Orus, and when this proved frustrating, I worked out mathematical equations and theories while talking to myself and engaging in stimulating debate and what I believe to be meaningful discourse. One of the lessons of those on assignment within the boundaries of an ancient is to keep to a rigorous routine of writing, reading, and self-talk to not let the pillars of the intellect crumble under the weight of laziness, alienation, and boredom. Thinking and speaking are skills, and like any skill, they can decay and wither away if not practiced regularly. Arcus 4. Stories and journals are scattered everywhere. So much to read, and yet I find myself drawn to the scribblings and renditions of the unknown creator I'm calling the Mad Designer. Journals filled with the wild sketches and musings of people I imagine are caught in other parts of this living dimension. People juxtaposed with other terror worlds and timelines that make little or no sense to who they are or where they're from. The illustrations and notes are foolish, absurd, and quite contradictory, and yet they bring moments of levity to my life, which does the soul good. I suppose it's a form of absurd escapism I turn to when I'm not reading the more traditional stories. Interestingly enough, I found 17 versions of a story featuring a killer named Evan, written by 17 versions of the same author from the Omniverse. 17 similar stories with sometimes subtle, sometimes significant differences. What I find particularly interesting is how the stories are written as fiction in one world and non-fiction in another. It reminds me of universus alveo, a theory that suggests that the human mind might very well be equipped with a powerful networking mechanism that reaches out to other worlds for wisdom and knowledge from our other selves. Some can use their minds in this way, and others can't. The theory suggests that those who have experienced trauma in their formative years detach from their reality, allowing them to explore other realities and worlds with relative ease. Artists like magicians and shamans see small things in the big, unexplainable, endless dream that is the Omniverse, and they bring these ideas or insights back to entertain, enlighten, and inspire the world. Fiction in one world, non-fiction in another. Everything is real, or nothing is. And here in the Chamber of Blood, there are countless horror stories of every variety. So many that it seems to me that one of the unknown prisoners was collecting these stories as a way to discover more about their imprisonment, the entity, and the terrible screams coming from the surrounding abyss. Whether this is true or not, I'm not sure, but what I do know is I spent the whole night reading my favorite stories out loud, like my father used to do by the fireplace. And the entire time I couldn't help but wonder, how could anyone have accessed and assembled such a rich collection of notes, journals, and stories? I have no immediate answer, but I suspect by the texture and density of the fog that I may be in a place as complex, mysterious, and misunderstood as a black hole, a living, breathing, all-consuming black hole, the serpent of infinity that gorges on its tail, that eats itself endlessly as it spirals downward into the cosmic Fibonacci stew that is life incomprehensible. Arcus 8282. Dozens of severed heads in the den, and I'm not sure how they got there. I stared at them all day, recognizing a few of them from the last few memories I've been exploring. It took me all night, but I made a cairn with the heads outside the door. When I was done, they began to talk and argue and bicker with each other over pedestrian nonsense. I squeezed my eyes shut until silence returned. When I opened my eyes again, they were gone. I then returned inside and retired to the Chamber of Blood, where I read stories aloud and went through the absurd creations of the mad designer. Chamber of Blood, most brutal murder in Sunny Lake history. A young woman is on trial for first-degree murder in the decapitation of her husband's mother, whose charred remains were found in mason jars in the suspect's solarium, while her head was found mangled in a broken blender in the kitchen. Samara Dwenlis, 33, is charged with first-degree murder in the June 2037 killing of Kirsty Hartz, 67. The trial commenced on Thursday. Prosecutors said they would not entertain a plea of insanity, despite the 911 call the suspect made claiming her mother-in-law was a vampire. The 911 call describes an ancient conspiracy with vampires who live among us and draw their powers from another dimension. Obscura, beyond understanding. The tower is alive. I have memories of what the tower was the night before, and it changes the next day. It changes in ways that defy reason, or anything we've come to know about the ontology of these ancients back home. It's entirely possible that if you were to understand all that this place is, that you would go insane. I opened the door to what I thought would be an empty room covered in dust, only to discover an entire city with skyscrapers and ancient pagodas. Bewildered, I stared among the ruins of the street at a group of teenagers cutting down massive mutant bug-like creatures with deadly samurai swords. I quickly closed the door and opened it again, to find the city was gone. It had completely disappeared. Nothing there but a small, dusty room with a strange-looking spider crawling toward me. I crushed the spider under the heel of my boot and didn't even attempt to understand what had just transpired. Chamber of Blood, Harbinger of Hell, Beneath the Ruins, 1. Stefan sipped his cold Turkish coffee as he read over his early morning efforts toward a short story he hoped to share on his blog. He read the opening lines and decided they could be stronger. With a sigh, he tore the yellow page from the legal pad, crumpled it into a ball, and tossed it into a growing pile of false starts in the middle of the opulent black and burgundy hotel room. He slammed the desk, frustrated, and wanted to write something fun and original for his blog, yet nothing came to him. The latest episode, sponsored by their mysterious benefactor, had his production team investigate ancient tombs in southwest Turkey. Not so much him, but his niece and nephew, who had tougher nerves for the macabre. Stefan much preferred a safe and cozy hotel room where he could raid the minibar and see to the logistics of the show. It wasn't that he didn't like adventure. It was more that he didn't like graves, tombs, or places that felt dark, creepy, and dangerous. Hattie had once suggested that he wrote horror stories as a kind of therapy to work out his fears and anxieties of the unknown. She was half right. The other half was that he simply liked to be alone. Alone with all the characters and voices chattering in his head. Voices that demanded to be heard and set to paper. Now the voices were compelling him to write a vampire story. Their benefactor claimed that there had been a village of real vampires in ancient Anatolia that had been hidden from the rest of the world. According to the intelligence provided, vampires weren't fictional monsters, but actual intra-dimensional creatures that had once tried to overrun the world. They had been defeated by an unknown group of mystical warriors. Somehow, The few creatures that had survived managed to erase themselves from history by warping and weaving whatever memory of them was left into exaggerated myths and legends. Stefan found this theory of myths and legends and parallel worlds interesting, if not intriguing. Vampires real. Actually real. Nothing like the movies, but real nevertheless. One theory he had just finished reading online suggested that everything created or imagined existed somewhere in the Garden of Infinity. In other words, stories and characters came from a real place in the infinite landscape that was the omniverse. The theory went on to suggest that artists had somehow unlocked their third eye and were able to see the other realities. An idea, a vision, or a dream, according to the theory, was the pineal gland seeing into the infinite for truth, wisdom, inspiration. The brain, then, was a quantum computer that could network with the infinite. It was a nice idea. It meant his most cherished characters from his favorite books were somehow, somewhere, real. A sudden knock at the door startled him out of his quantum musings. "Mr. Wa, your lunch is ready." Lunchtime already, and Stefan still didn't have his story. He rose lazily in his bathrobe, hoping Jordan and Hattie had better luck finding the unmarked graves they had set out to find. He imagined his niece and nephew were enjoying the sun while filming the ruins, and relishing the peanut butter and banana sandwiches he had prepared for them. Chamber of blood, harbinger of hell, beneath the ruins, 2. "Move away from the casket!" A middle-aged woman with blonde hair and blue eyes, dressed in a black suit, pointed a revolver at Hattie and Jordan. Hattie dropped her shovel, sighed, exchanged a look with her brother, and stepped away from the bolted casket. "Who do you work for?" Hattie asked, eyeing the woman. "That, my dear, does not concern you." Jordan shook his head. "I don't think you should open it." "Shut up. My brother's right." Hattie pointed at the symbols etched all in the rotten wood of the casket. "It's a warning of some kind. Whatever's in there is meant to stay in there." She scrutinized the half-crescent and 3 dots and wondered what they meant. They didn't resemble any of the other symbols she had come across in the last few months. "Superstitious nonsense," the woman yelled, aimed the revolver at the bolt, and pulled the trigger. A report echoed through the ruins and the surrounding forest. Hattie wondered if their guide and translator had heard them. He probably didn't even take notice or didn't care. He refused to follow them near the tombs, called them ignorant tourists, and said he would stay by the car texting his friends until they returned. The woman pulled the trigger repeatedly until the bolt clanged off and hit the ground with a thud. "I hope he calls the police," Jordan whispered to Hattie. "I wouldn't count on it." The woman examined the casket carefully. Hattie and Jordan inched backward as she struggled to yank the lid open. As Hattie cautiously backed away, she figured the woman worked for the same secret society that had now interfered with several of her investigations. She didn't know much about them, but from what she had gathered by overhearing a few of their goons in Egypt was that they were searching for hidden knowledge. Knowledge they believed would help humanity transcend to another plane of existence. "Please," Hattie cautioned, "don't open it until we know what the symbol means." The goon scoffed, and with a labored scream yanked the lid open to reveal nothing. Nothing but a strange black mist. "I don't understand," she said. "It's supposed to be here. The book." The goon's eyes narrowed. Frustration creased her face as black mist suddenly rose and spiraled into her mouth and nose as though it were alive. Hattie and Jordan stepped out of the grave. The woman gagged, coughed, and collapsed. There in the dirt, she jerked and twitched in all kinds of unnatural directions, screaming and shrieking as the mist reshaped her body into something indescribably grotesque. Her veins stood out thick and black in her neck, her hands smashed the ground, and she went into hysteric convulsions as though being burned alive. Then, with a blood-curdling scream, her body went limp and silent. Hattie repressed a cry of horror. She felt a cold prickle run down her spine as she stared at the scene in disbelief. What was going on? What strange mist could do such a thing to a person? Was it some kind of ancient poison? Some kind of toxic vapor? Or was it something worse? "Well, you don't see that every day, do you?" Jordan said flatly. "I seriously wish I got that on my phone." Hattie sighed. "Is she dead?" "Dead as a tomb." Hattie didn't find him funny, not in the least. He was scared. She could tell by his desperate attempt to use humor to hide his fear. He was just about to crack another joke when the creature suddenly twitched back to life. Startled, Hattie gasped and pulled at Jordan's t-shirt, saying, "We need to get out of here." But just as she stepped back, the creature turned to face them with blood-red eyes and a jaw protruding like a snout with teeth that seemed to be growing underneath stretched skin. "Oh shit!" Hattie blurted. She lost her footing and fell to the ground with her brother. The creature that had once been a woman roared at them, revealing two massive fangs like carving knives. Chamber of Blood, Harbinger of Hell, Beneath the Ruins, 3. "This way!" Hattie yelled, leading Jordan through the shadow and light spilling through the forest canopy. She could hear the creature shrieking as it hunted them with unnatural speed and resolve. Spotting an outcrop of jagged rocks, she quickly yanked her brother into hiding. "Aren't vampires supposed to explode in sunlight?" Jordan asked. "I mean, isn't that what's supposed to happen? Doesn't it know it's supposed to be dead?" Hattie instantly placed a finger by his quivering lips as she heard footfalls approaching. She repressed an urge to look at the creature. Instead, she listened. She could hear the clattering and hissing coming from its hungry jaws. She could hear the crunch of stones and the distinct snap of twigs as the creature searched for them. Then the footfalls seemed to change direction, growing fainter and fainter, until all she heard was the chirping of insects. Hattie heaved a shuddering breath. Jordan gulped and swallowed a lump in his throat, saying, "We should have respected the warning." If that's what it was, a warning, what else could it be? "I don't know. What I do know is, we've released something foul into the world." "And by foul, you mean the vampire and not gas," Jordan said with a smirk. "Just clarifying." "Not funny." "A little funny." "No, not even a little." Hattie risked moving beyond the rocks. She glanced apprehensively, half expecting the creature to hurl itself at them. When nothing happened, she stood and slowly and quietly led Jordan back toward their guide. As she pushed her way through the woods, she couldn't help but notice the similarities between all the symbols she had seen at the last few investigation sites. They were unlike anything she had ever seen before, and she had discovered them in completely different parts of the world. India, Africa, Portugal, England, Paris, and now, Turkey. Hattie couldn't help but feel something was amiss. She broke the silence, saying, "We're being pulled into something far more complex than we've been led to believe. It's almost like we're being used." "Used? For what? Who cares about a bunch of bozos from Montreal who release foul things into the world?" Hattie shook her head, gave him a grave look, and answered, "I don't know, but I think it's about time we meet our mysterious—" A twig snapped, startling the siblings. Before Hattie could finish her thought, the creature stood framed between two trees, dappled in sunlight. Jordan screamed in terror as the creature lunged at him, grabbing his arm and sinking its bony claws into his skin. With a mighty roar, the creature hurled him against a tree with a thud. Groaning, he sagged to the ground as inky blackness seeped down over his vision. Hattie thought quickly, spotting a fallen branch on the ground. The creature inched closer to Jordan, staring at him as though he were a steak. It kneeled before him and prepared to sink its fangs into Jordan's neck to satiate its red thirst. Just as it opened its gaping mouth, a resounding yell interrupted it. The creature hissed and turned just in time to receive a branch across the face. It fell to the side, then scrambled to its feet, locking eyes with Hattie. Hattie backed away slowly, glad she had saved her brother from certain doom, but unsure what would happen next. Then, inspired by the vampire films she had seen with her Uncle Stefan, she turned the sharp side of the branch to face the creature just as it pounced on her like a lion. The makeshift stake hit its mark, skewering the creature straight through its monstrous heart. The creature shrieked something awful and collapsed to its knees, holding the stake. Wiping her brow, Hattie stepped away from the creature and approached her brother. But a sudden squelching sound froze her to the core. Slowly, she turned to watch the creature pull out the stake with the pulpy dead heart still attached. The creature tossed the heart to the side with a mangled smile. An instant later, it pounced over Hattie, taking her to the ground. Hattie pushed and jerked under its powerful grip as it salivated and peered hungrily at the thick arterial vein pumping in her neck. Saliva dripped down Hattie's neck, slow, warm, and slimy like a slug. She screamed, and then had no breath to scream and began to see not stars, but geometry. Symbols. Symbols she had previously discovered in the overlap, as she often called it. She didn't know what else to call what she understood to be a Venn intersection of worlds, where she could see and access knowledge and memories no one else could. Hattie closed her eyes and saw the twisted triangle symbol she had just uncovered in an ancient temple. Then she saw the strange circle slashed in half, with a line that she had discovered all over the walls and floor of an abandoned asylum, as though someone or something was conducting dark experiments in the overlap on the patients. It was all very bizarre and new to her. Now, as the creature prepared to feast on her blood, Hattie wasn't seeing memories pass before her eyes, but all these strange and arcane symbols that felt older than life itself, as though someone or something were trying to send her a message from the overlap. Chamber of blood, harbinger of hell, beneath the ruins, 4. As the creature prepared to quench its thirst, Hattie felt the end coming. Desperate hands fumbled over dirt and twigs, searching for something, anything. Then, just as the creature prepared to puncture her neck, she grabbed a rock the size of a baseball and smashed it straight through its mouth, shattering its deadly fangs. The creature jolted to its feet with mad agony. Pieces of bone and tooth dropped into a thick puddle of blood and saliva. Hattie turned to see Jordan moaning. He was alive, barely. Nevertheless, alive. Relieved, she scrambled to her feet, trying to think of a way to destroy this ancient evil once and for all. Then she saw it. The revolver, hanging from the belt. Without hesitation, she rushed up to the creature as 2 new white fangs pushed out the bloody remnants of the old. Before it realized what was happening, she snatched the revolver and shot the creature point blank in the face. The creature fell head over heels as Hattie unloaded the revolver into its face and body. But bullets were futile against this otherworldly apparition. Within moments, the creature was clambering to its feet, the whole while staring at Hattie with blood-red eyes. Nervously, she inched backward, not knowing where to go or what to do. There was nowhere to go. Nothing she could do. This was the end. With incredible speed and strength, the creature pounced and took Hattie to the ground. Gleaming white fangs approached her neck with malice. She jerked and kicked and screamed under its weight. She felt its warm breath inches away from the nape of her neck. Then, in her mind's eye, she saw them again. The symbols. All of them. They swirled and flashed and then coalesced into one symbol. The symbol she had seen etched in the casket. With dawning realization, she understood. The symbol wasn't a warning, but a seal. A seal to imprison this unfathomable, indescribable creature. As the creature prepared to gorge on her life, she managed to grab something sharp off the ground. Its broken fang. And with the last of her strength, she managed to etch the crescent and the 3 dots deep into its cheek. Suddenly, the creature's eyes widened into great big pools of disbelief. It looked at Hattie in abject terror as it stumbled backward, desperately trying to scratch the symbol off its ghastly face. But it was too late. Black mist, like acid, bubbled and burned through the creature's skin. The percolating mist filled its lungs, chest, and neck. The belly and chest ballooned as pressure bludgeoned the creature from within. Then, with an agonized shriek, it exploded like a cherry bomb. Covered in gore, Hattie dragged herself beside her rousing brother. "What did I miss?" he groaned and sat up, leaning against the tree. He narrowed his gaze and peered through the thin red mist of blood that hung heavy in the air. "Where's the—" His voice trailed away as he noticed the shards of bone and chunks of flesh covering his clothes. In silence, they picked off bits and pieces of the creature. Then Jordan said, "Well, this was pleasant. Pleasant as a funeral." Hattie didn't respond to his stupidity. She was thinking about the symbols they had come across in their investigations. She wondered what they meant, where they came from, and if there was something connecting all these paranormal sites they were being sent to investigate. Moreover, she wondered if their benefactor was using them in some kind of chess game against forces unknown. Chamber of Blood, Old Bloody. This is the story the tour guide told us after showing us around the old Mad Canyon distillery in Moonlight Bay. She offered the adults a taste of Old Bloody, a recipe that had been infamous during Prohibition. While we tasted the bathtub gin, no one spoke as the firewater burned down our throats. The tour guide talked about the abandoned distillery we were walking through, telling us about how the first gang had all but disappeared before the legendary Al Capone got his hands on the operation. She must have told the story often, as she spoke fluidly and made gestures and pauses at all the right moments. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm not one for tall tales, but what we know of the disappearance of the Maddie Hatter gang is very much a vampire story if ever I heard one. The Maddie Hatter gang was mostly made up of the Maddock family, led by the father, Hank, who had a thing about collecting hats from rival gang members he butchered. He must have stolen the wrong hat, because that bloodlust came back to haunt him in the fall of 1921, when his gang disappeared with only the youngest of the family left to tell the tale of what had befallen them. And what had befallen them was indeed a great mystery. A mystery people to this day bicker about and dismiss as an urban legend. But I swear, it's no legend, and all of it is the truth. The twins, Candace and Cody, while returning with some equipment they had picked up in Ontario, drove into the valley and then carried the copper tubing and flasks into the caves where the gang prepared their white lightning. But when they arrived, they found nothing but blood. Blood on the floor, blood on the walls, blood, if you'll believe it, running through the tubes and coils of the still. At first, they thought it may have been a rival gang. but there was no sign of bullets or bodies, or even a struggle. Just blood, and an uncanny fog that hung low and heavy in the air. The twins instantly resolved to find whoever had done this to their gang, and moreover, they wanted to give their siblings, cousins, and parents a proper burial. So they grabbed a lantern and plunged into the twisting bowels of the mountain, following a trail of blood. They searched deep into the night with no result. Cody shone the lantern and was just about to tell his sister he was beaten when he heard the crunch of stone in the distance. He charged ahead, and she chased after him, stumbling over a boulder, hitting her head against the ground, and losing consciousness. When Candace roused, she sprang to her feet and rushed toward the flickering lantern light, screaming her brother's name. Through dancing shadow and light, she approached her pale brother sprawled over the ground with 2 small puncture wounds in his neck. She felt his chest for a pulse and gasped when she realized he was dead. She shuddered, then screamed, and moved by an unknown force, she grabbed the lantern and charged forward. Then, without realizing it, she entered a massive cavern, feeling the ground beneath her feet turn to mush. She shone her lantern around, revealing piles of human skulls amidst thousands of beetles moving through a thick sludge. At her feet, she saw a few beetles devouring a sick bat. She tensed and looked upward to see thousands of bats sleeping. A few beetles scurried over her foot with morsels of rotting flesh, and she kicked them away. She swallowed her fear, realizing that if she woke the bats, they would strip her flesh clean in a matter of minutes. Then she glanced at the familiar barrels in the corner by a pile of animal bones. Silently and carefully, she made her way past the bones. Opening the barrel, she cringed as a horrible stench assaulted her nose. She peered at the dark brew and wasn't sure what she was looking at. Then she realized she was staring at fermenting lumps of flesh in thick, putrid blood. She was in the vampire's lair. But before she could continue her search, a roar suddenly startled her. Candace turned and found herself staring at a demon with fangs, with a swirling black fog rising at its feet. Through the fog, she saw it was wearing her father's hat. She gave a shout of revenge like thunder. The vampire twisted its ugly head in startled disbelief. Fearlessly, Candace threw herself at the vampire. She didn't care what this thing was or where it came from. She just wanted it dead, and she wanted to do her family proud. The vampire meant to kill her by sinking its fangs in her neck, but she felt strong enough to bring down a mountain. And so she jerked and kicked and pushed its snarling face. With a snarl of her own, she bit back at the vampire, tearing pale flesh off its neck with teeth and jaws strong enough to crush rock. Before the vampire realized what was happening, she gouged its eye with her thumb, ramming it deeper and deeper as it desperately clawed flesh off her arms and face. But she didn't care. She would not be denied. And within moments she felt the delicate brain matter like warm mud and smiled. Then she curled her finger and yanked as hard as she could with a mad laugh. With a shriek, the vampire convulsed violently, then stopped all at once, its jaws frozen in a twisted, agonized howl. Unable to control her growing laughter, she took back her father's hat and stood proudly as open wounds leaked and sputtered blood. Then the fog rolled over the vampire and somehow made it all disappear. The vampire, the bats, the beetles, the blood. Everything. Needless to say, no one believed Candace, and she was put into an asylum to shut up and wither away. But eventually some rich philanthropist took charge of her, and she was never seen again. Everyone was silent. Someone laughed and said, "That's not really a vampire story, is it?" The tour guide replied, "Not like we're used to, no. But that's her story, and I swear I told it like I heard it." Then a young woman in a concerned voice added, "I hope that girl ended up all right."